The forest that we all know well always appears to us as a friendly and happy place, close to the body, heart and soul. It is a place of peace and relaxation, a place to enjoy nature and its majesty. Forests, covering almost 30% of our country's area, comprise an ecosystem which, as the richest, most durable and most complex group of organisms, plays a priority role in the natural environment. The guarantee of the proper functioning and high efficiency of this system is the fluidity of the circulation of matter according to the stable and durable food chain operating in nature, forming an ecological pyramid. At the very top of it are large carnivores, strictly specialized in gaining food and constituting the last link in this perfect system. Stable, and in the case of some species even increasing numbers of large predators, are the effect of active protection of these animals. Actions taken by the state forests allow for the maintenance and development of the European bison population and many other species. Not without significance is the creation of protection zones, as well as active protection of the most valuable natural areas. The good health condition of predators is also a consequence of the high abundance and species richness of herbivores, kept thanks to the rational management of resources in forests. Forest mighties. Our story follows the trail of real forest mighties, in which the main characters are the greatest Polish predators. In search of traces and signs of their existence, we travelled through Polish forests with a calendar of the 4 seasons in hand. The awakening of the largest predator does not escape the attention of vigilant wolves, for whom the bear can be a food competitor, especially before the time of spring abundance. On the white foot, bears easily find the remains of wolf prey, trying to seize them for their own use. However, they only succeed in the absence of wolves or when the carcass is guarded by a single individual who has no better chance against the hungry brown mighty. The end of winter and early spring is the culmination of wolf love. During heat, a she-wolf is adored by her partner, a male wolf who constantly tries to win her favor. Although even 1-year-old wolves can mature sexually and give birth to offspring, due to the social specificity of the pack, this happens rarely, because this privilege belongs only to the parental pair dominating in the family group. Even the unexpectedly frosty and snowy pre-spring weather is not able to extinguish the fever of wolf mating season. Wolves have good eyesight and are sensitive to movement. However, their sense of smell and hearing are much more perfect. The large mobility of the ears in relation to the position of the head makes it easy to determine the direction of the sounds heard. In the early spring, the Bieszczady Mountains slowly shed their thick, heavy winter duvet. Further characteristic shapes of the mountains emerge from the disappearing snow, such as this outline, drawn with the almost erotic line of the Połonina Carinska Massif in the Bieszczady Mountains. The long, frosty and snowy winter meant that the hungry Ural owls were forced to leave the forests and hunt rodents in open spaces where the wind has exposed the snow in some places. It was there that the first pre-spring thaws intensified the activity of voles and mice. Monogamous ravens, which are considered models of loyalty and partner fidelity for the rest of the life of one of the partners, are extremely social. Ravens willingly accompany large predators, although in some cases against the wish and will of those animals. You can even get the impression that ravens' insistence and boldness is often pure entertainment for them, and that it only serves to integrate. The heavy, large-winged white-tailed eagle has enough strength and determination, and at the same time is very fast, so as not only to repel the attacks of pesky scavengers, but also to successfully hunt on its own. The attacking white-tailed eagle, which grasps its victims with long, strong, curved claws, moves both legs forward in flight, trying to catch the target in a strong, firm grip. With a large and heavy beak with sharp edges and a hook-shaped end, it kills the prey and cuts it into portions. At the bottom of the pre-spring Carpathian beech forest, the lynx is perfectly masked. Our largest, extremely secretive wildcat hunts not only for birds, hares, or favorite roe deer. It also chooses deer as prey, especially calves and hind, and sometimes even younger stags. The lynx looks for them by carefully penetrating the territory and using ambushes. The spotted pattern of the lynx's fur is a characteristic color map of each individual. The contrasting arrangement of black spots makes it possible to identify individual intensely spotted cats from the Carpathian population, in contrast to the more or less uniformly fawn-colored cats from the northeastern population. Lynxes are typical forest loners who need a large area of dense forest complexes to live a healthy and prosperous life. In the period of estrus, which takes place from January to March, often called the March caterwauling, lynxes significantly increase their daily activity and undertake trips over longer than usual distances, now an average of several kilometers. During their march, they like to use the trunks of fallen trees, wind throws, boulders and rocks. Lynxes usually hunt large animals that they do not eat during one meal. So they return to such prey for several consecutive days at the same time of day. They carefully mask their prey from scavengers, for instance by burying it under fallen leaves. After the thaw, when the sun heats the ground more and more intensively, early spring finally acquires warm colors and fresh scents. In the mountains, the sunniest valleys and warm, mid-forest open clearings on the southern slopes come to life first. There, the first willows and aspens will soon bloom, and swollen leaf buds will develop on the birches. Regardless of their gender, lesser spotted eagles have fairly uniformly grey-brown plumage. Thorny blackthorn thickets, densely branched and heavily overgrown, are extremely difficult to access for humans, but they serve the animals of many species as irreplaceable hideouts, a place of peaceful rest, nesting grounds, but also attractive granaries and feeding grounds. Near the badger carcass, a wandering young cub, newly abandoned by his mother bear, gains a new experience of independent living in a great forest. He reacts to every murmur, noise and movement in the surroundings with a careful stand-up. The young 2-year-old bear has just begun a difficult time of learning to live an independent life. The youngster is now focused on avoiding adult, dangerous bears, and he is constantly looking for food. For him, the fir, nearly 200-year-old Carpathian forest, is full of intriguing sounds, tastes and smells, which he inspects with a great curiosity. The bear cub shows extraordinary dexterity, perfectly climbing trees, which from the very beginning are the most important way for him to quickly escape from any attackers. May and June are the times when lonely bears most often walk in pairs, although they do not bond with each other. It is the period of estrus for female bears, adored now by extremely agitated males, that becomes the reason for the apparent orphanage of the bear cubs from the previous year's litter. The brown bear is our largest predatory mammal, although in fact it is an omnivorous opportunist that feeds on whatever is most readily available at any given time. It hunts relatively rarely and steals meat much more willingly, grabbing the prey from wolves. The carcass of animals hunted by wolves is the most attractive prey for bears in spring, after waking up, and then also in autumn, when the bears accumulate fat reserves for the next winter. In conditions of summer abundance, bears often seem to prefer plant food over meat, such as juicy raspberries, blackberries, or blueberries. The heaviest male brown bears living in Poland may weigh over 400 kilograms. It is these largest and strongest giants that have priority in the adoration of females. Females are clearly smaller than males, although their figures can be quite corpulent and their weight can exceed 250 kilograms. During estrus, the male does not leave the female for one step, following her through the forest like her shadow. During this time, the female bear can mate with him and other males many times. During the spring and summer courtship, the male consistently and stubbornly pursues his goal. He murmurs to his partner every now and then, sniffs her, licks her, bites her, and embraces her, thus encouraging her to have intimate close-ups. Warm, clear, and quite long nights become the best time for bear courtship, during which only the moon with its subtle glow can reveal the secret. The female, who finally finds herself in the loving embrace of the randy male, seems completely hampered. The culmination of the mating is extremely exhausting for lovers, especially for an extremely excited and fully committed male. For males absorbed in courtship, the early summer nights turn out to be too short to eat decently at the same time. It also happens that before they hide again in the thicket for a daily rest, the sun, which has already penetrated the forest, unmasks the faces of these night spirits. In early summer, somewhere in seclusion, in the quiet thickets of forest refuges, most of the young European bison were born. After only a few days, the calving cows return to their herds with their offspring. Now the calves, fed with their mother's milk for at least a year, are witnessing the estrus that takes place in their childless aunts from August to October. Miraculously saved from extinction, the European bison, although it is not a predator, nevertheless due to its size, strength, charisma, and the will to survive in wild nature, fully deserves the name of a great forest mighty who can bravely stand up to our greatest predators. The largest populations of the Polish bison, with several hundred individuals each, live in the Białowieża primeval forest and in the Bieszczady mountains. The free-living Bieszczady bison are naturally more skittish, cautious, and wild than the Białowieża bison, living relatively close to humans. The European bison are considered typically forest animals. They need dense forests and thickets, primarily for cover and shelter. However, as great herbivores, they require open grasslands, mid-forest meadows, glades and wet sedge communities that are rich in food. In the lush green of the forest, the deer roam, naturally daytime animals, feeding during the day only in secluded refuges, where they are not scared off by humans and harassed by predators. Deer feel much more at ease in a herd called a swarm, especially when an experienced female, called an alpha doe, watches over their safety. She leads the herd to the feeding ground, assesses the situation, and in case of danger, warns other deer, sets the pace and the direction of the escape. In the shadowy corners of a mature old forest, the real danger for foraging deer can lurk quite close, even in the middle of the day. Deer meat is the wolf's greatest delicacy. Wolves can sometimes hunt for smaller prey alone or in pairs. The remaining members of the pack are informed about the success of the hunt with a piercing and loud howl. This is the best way for wolves to communicate over long distances. It plays a contact role for the members of the scattered family, and a warning role for neighboring families. Rapidly growing grasses and a thicket of flower vegetation in the mid-forest meadows makes it easy for wolves to sneak up potential prey, also in open areas. In the first months of life of puppies, born in May or June, the hunting activity of adult wolves is around the clock and is focused on a relatively small area near the burrow where the puppies stay for the first 2 months. The long, hot summer days mean that hungry and thirsty bears do not survive until dusk, and often at sunset they go to feeding grounds, also outside the forests, then monitoring their surroundings very closely. Due to the high vegetation, even the largest specimens often stand up, which gives them a wider field of observation. In the most attractive feeding grounds, especially next to the carcasses of hunted or abandoned prey, there may be direct confrontations between the two greatest Carpathian mighties, bears and wolves. The mood of such close encounters between wolves and bears can be extremely diverse depending on the mutual, ad hoc attitude of competitors, but above all on the mutual balance of forces or needs. the same animals, which can be extremely aggressive, other times tolerate each other completely. While the greatest threat to young bear cubs during the breeding season are adult males, a real threat outside this period are also packs of wolves, which they frequently encounter in hunting territories and on attractive feeding grounds. The bear cub's safety is constantly supervised by a caring and brave mother who tries not to let her offspring out of sight, and in the event of a danger noticed and confirmed during the stand-up, she immediately alarms with a series of guttural barking grunts in the rhythm of accelerated, deep breathing, forcing the cubs to quickly run away. Six-month-old bear cubs, despite the careful protection of their mother, still have to be vigilant, especially in the open area, where there are no trees to escape to. And even if a single juvenile wolf appears near them, which it seems is not a real threat to a prudent, close-knit family. By nature, the brown bear is not a particularly offensive or aggressive animal, probably mainly because it is not a typical territorialist defending its territory. Although, as a voracious gourmand, it is quite easily affected by emotions associated with foraging. A bear who is hungry or who claims exclusivity or priority to attractive foods more easily becomes irritated, which can affect its surroundings. Spring and summer are extremely busy times for the clawed mighties of skies above forests. After a laborious period of building the nest and incubating the eggs, the busiest time for feeding the chicks comes. These predators then hunt small and medium-sized mammals and birds, but they also eagerly use the carcasses of prey hunted by wolves. A voracious buzzard, which is half the size and several times lighter than an eagle, has a slightly lower food demand. It is our most numerous species of claws, nestling more often on the edge than in the depths of forests. Buzzards, as a rule, hunt rodents in the meadows, which they look out for from their hunting perch, up to several kilometers from their nest. Lesser-spotted eagles also feed in the same open areas rich in mice and voles, looking for their victims from high tree hunting perches during patrol flights, but also often while combining meadows and herbs on foot. Mysterious corncrakes are among the birds that sometimes fall prey to lesser-spotted eagles. These intriguing rails, taking advantage of the thicket of unknown meadows, can nest in secret until August. In the period of vocal activity during the breeding season, territorial corncrakes constantly call from dusk to dawn with their loud, mechanical, two-syllable hoarse croaking, which resembles the sound of a dry stick being quickly dragged across a wooden grater. Ravens, also called wolf birds, are undoubtedly the greatest companions of the Bieszczady wolves and perhaps the only ones fully tolerated by them. These inseparable companions of the wolf travelers are constantly nearby, and even among wolves in numbers strictly dependent on their hunting activity. Despite the fact that wolves are still very cautious and timid and avoid people like fire, in the rich Carpathian forests you can regularly come across their tracks and traces of predatory activity. As a rule, only in exceptional situations, with great discretion, patience and with a bit of luck, it is possible to look an intrigued, unwavering wolf straight into its wild eyes. Thanks to many years of species protection, the wolf population slowly recovers and returns to the forest areas it once occupied. Although the wolf, as an apex predator, regulates the number of herbivores and thus contributes to the biosynotic balance, it also plays an important ecological role, especially in close to natural ecosystems. In the eyes of many people, it remains their direct competitor in the use of natural resources and a dangerous breeding pest. In the Bieszczady Mountains, with every day of summer, especially when a cold night follows a hot day, more and more morning mists arise, and they are most easily formed in ravines and stream valleys, enriching the summer landscape of densely forested mountains. The mountain river flowing through the Carpathian forests, carrying hectoliters of fresh, cool water, seems absolutely beneficial and exciting for the bears who come here during the hot summer. The female bear, who wants to safely and calmly lead bear cubs across the mountain river, most often crosses it under the cover of darkness, and for this purpose chooses wide stony brooks and comfortable long thresholds, avoiding numerous rapids and larger depths, which she knows perfectly well. The biggest and undoubtedly the loudest heroes of autumn slowly spreading in September are deer, which are just starting an extremely loud rut. The annual deer mating ritual takes place in various places, ranging from the largest old-growth forests and the darkest woods, through dense young forests, dry glades, but also vast swamps and river valleys or small mid-forest wetlands. The powerful bass timbre of deer roars echoes all night long for several weeks, at the distance of many kilometers, through the mountains and forests. In the wildest backwoods, the rutting rituals may also be continued in the daytime. Day by day, morning mists are sinking the forest deeper into an autumn chill. The sun is shining fainter and shorter, barely warming the tree stands bathed in fog. Now the crowns of deciduous trees change into a palette of different, warm colors, creating exceptionally charming compositions that give an irresistible impression of giant flower bouquets. Autumn is a period of increased activity of pygmy owls, which now intensively hunt birds in the treetops from afternoon to dusk. In excitement, these birds raise their tails like wrens, making nervous movements with them. The cautious, extremely secretive wildcat eagerly uses the recesses of the dense forest. It only goes hunting for the edge of the forest complexes and mid-forest clearings where it lurks mainly for rodents. The very low number of wildcats, probably only found in the Carpathians, and their extremely secretive twilight night lifestyle make these cats to be almost like ghosts. And make them belong to our least frequently observed animals. However, it happens in winter that when access to small prey is difficult, especially in years with smaller number of forest rodents, they sometimes become hungry, and then, attracted by the tempting smell of deer remains after the wolf feast, they come out of hiding during the day. On the edges of the Bieszczady forests overgrown with blackthorn shrubs, covered with small, tart but nutritious plums, flocks of thrush feed, among them which there are numerous fieldfares and single redwings. During severe winters in the primeval forest conditions, the atmosphere of a struggle for survival prevails. The thrushes or woodpeckers, busy with constant feeding, do not have an easy life, and in addition, they do not lack equally determined enemies. It is surprising that such a strong, long-beaked and aggressive great-spotted woodpecker cannot be calm even in the presence of a smaller, but extremely aggressive and brave pygmy owl. In the case of necessity, Ural owls successfully hunt in open spaces during the day. The specific structure of the vane on the flight feathers, which enables the owls to fly practically in silence, guarantees high hunting success also in these unusual circumstances. The activity of wolf packs combing vast forests seems to be the most noticeable now, due to the winter intensity of travels, but also due to the traces of animals and forest refuges clearly visible in the snow. Wolves hunt large herbivores in an organized manner, using proven strategies of well-coordinated group hunting. Hungry wolves eat as much of a freshly hunted prey as their stomachs can hold at once. They know well that what they leave behind can be appropriated by other scavengers. Magpies and other corvids, having eaten their fill, take the meat out quickly and efficiently, piece by piece, hiding the stolen portions for later in places known only to them. In the cold, snowy winter, nothing will be wasted, because even the tiniest remains of carrion find their happy amateurs. In this way, wolves inadvertently feed many different inhabitants of the forest throughout the year. From beetles and butterflies, through a whole range of birds, chilled great tits, great golden eagles, and ending with mammals, rodents, martins, wildcats, foxes, and even bears. In the case of the most attractive prey, for instance abandoned by frightened wolves, there is an absolute hierarchy of individuals and species of scavengers. As a rule, priority is always given to the bigger, stronger, and more courageous ones, but sometimes only after a fierce fight. Everything changes and becomes organized in an instant when a golden eagle appears nearby. This sky hunter sows a legitimate fear among all the winged forest dwellers he encounters near the carcass. No wonder, since he is an excellent hunter, armed with a powerful sharp beak and extremely strong grasping claws. The white-tailed eagle, which is even larger, but also much heavier than the golden eagle, is not an eagle in taxonomic terms. Contrary to the great impression it makes and all other appearances, it is not as brave as the golden eagle. Ravens can sense it perfectly, so they harass and stalk white-tailed eagles whenever they can. A stray, cold and hungry young white-tailed eagle, thanks to the ravens, has tracked the fresh carcass of a doe. Regardless of their annoyance, it tries to stealthily devour as much meat as possible before the local golden eagle or the four-legged deer killers return to take a second helping. Wolves are food opportunists, hunting for medium-sized and large prey, the most numerous and most accessible in the environment, also for farm animals, kept without the required safeguards. Wolf packs, however, definitely prefer hunting wild forest animals, especially deer, as long as their population is kept at a sufficiently high level. The winter scenery of Polish forests becomes more severe along with worsening weather conditions. At such truly critical moments, it is sometimes hard to believe that this seemingly hostile landscape can be a common, happy refuge for all of our greatest herbivores and predators. Regardless of the weather, season, region, and environment, this fully self-sufficient, actively functioning set of natural, mutually complementary forces, physiological needs, and ecological dependencies will remain insurmountable in its interrupted circulation of matter. as long as our wisdom and rational management by foresters allow it to continue in an efficiently functioning environment. Winter, though harsh, difficult and hostile, does in fact ultimately appear to be clean, fresh, and wonderfully optimistic. The annual life cycle of wildlife ends in winter, and a new cycle begins as it declines. And the forest mighties will be the heroes of the forest stories once again.